We are here, Mr. Jim Hoke and I. Jim Hoke is a fabulous musician, probably one of the most prolific musicians that I know in my life. He's not only a great woodwind player, but he also plays steel and guitar and composes and all these kind of things. He's played with, you just played on the latest McCartney thing, right?
I am on the new single.
That is awesome, yes. Quick backstory, before I moved to Nashville, I was living in Toronto, and one of my favorite artists, Josh Rouse, released a record called 1972, and there's a ton of beautiful flute and saxophone stuff on that. And fast forward 15 years, the person that played all that stuff is sitting across from me. So
it's amazing.
There you go.
They all come to Nashville.
Yes. So I wanted to dive into that first, if you're cool with that, about how things have kind of changed since you first came to town and what it was like in the session world and stuff like that.
Oh my. Well, I've been in Nashville 30 years.
30 years. Yeah.
So I came here in 1985, and things were kind of in a lull. The big urban cowboy craze of the mid-'70s was a big spike in studio work for everybody. All of a sudden, Nashville was real cool. But that had sort of peaked and played out, and country music had kind of settled into this tepid period. It wasn't very country at all. You had DX7s were on every single record.
Kind of like now, maybe, with the pop country that's kind of happening? Sorry.
Kind of like now, yeah.
So the DX7s were coming into the country world?
Totally.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember going to a studio one day, and Hoyt Henry said, "Guess what? I heard a record on the radio that didn't have a DX on it." Oh, and they all had that little belly DX7 Rhodes sound.
Yeah.
Because country wanted to be pop. It was in one of those periods where you didn't hear a steel guitar at all, like for years. It was kind of blando, you know?
Do you feel like it's cyclical like that? Like that's happening now, too, with it going pop? And then it'll get pulled back eventually with like a Chris Stapleton and stuff like that?
Seems to be.
So who was the person back in, so that what you said, mid-'80s? It kind of started doing that?
That's right.
Who kind of pulled it back into the country, like true country?
Oh, probably somebody like Rodney Crowell stayed true country with his Texas roots. Mm-hmm. He was always making records that were less commercially geared. And let's see, who was bringing... George Strait, of course,
right, yeah.
Kind of stayed the course of traditional country through all that. Mm-hmm. And
can you imagine a DX7 on a George Strait record?
No.
He might have done some. There might have been a demo somewhere.
Probably.
So how did you fit into that in the session world? So when you first got here, was being a session musician something that you wanted to do? Was that kind of a goal of yours, or what were you kind of
Definitely. Mm-hmm. I came here to try to crack the studio scene, and I figured I'd just waltz into town and take over all the harmonica work.
Okay, so you were playing harmonica back then too?
A lot, yeah.
Okay.
I thought that was my big, that was going to be my big ace in the hole. Of course, Terry McMillan had the harp thing sewn up.
Yeah.
And all the producers in town are, as you know now, tend to be pretty loyal to their crew, and they like the comfort zone of a nice bunch of guys who work together and groove. So it was kind of like, hey, welcome to Nashville. There's the end of the line.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. I took some bad advice that was given me when I came to town, which was this. You know, you want to work cheap. You want to get known as much as you can, and that means saying yes to everything. And if someone offers you low dough, go ahead and take it. You just want to make a lot of connections. And I think the guy was just trying to exploit me and get me in a studio to work for, putz money. The thing to do is to come in really sure of yourself. If you've got the goods, if you can deliver, don't come in there all humble and go take the bottom of the barrel gigs, Mm-hmm. Come in and shoot for top dollar and make people realize that you're serious and you've got something.
Yeah.
Because once you establish yourself as being easy, it takes a long time to dig yourself out of that. People will see you this way. And it took me years, I had to get on some good records and play on some more important people's projects before I could start asking for more dough and getting it.
So do you feel I totally see that. I mean, that's when I came here 10 years ago, and I mean, it's so interesting in our business.
10 years? I thought you'd be more successful by now, Tyler.
I'm working on it.
What went wrong?
I'm
No,
working
you're
on
doing
it.
great, man.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I totally see where you're coming from, and I mean, it's interesting and I'm not trying to compare myself to you, but it's interesting coming to town and having that conversation happens all over the place, because there's no checks and balances with our jobs. As session people, it's like, this is the price that you come with to the artist or the producer, and this is what you bring to the table, and you hope that those things match. And there's no, like, the union can't step in, and there's no people that are saying, you know, I'll come in and do it for half. I mean, that happens to us all the time.
Yeah, we get outbid, low ball bids. Yeah.
So how
I've
do you
been
feel?
losing a lot of them.
The way that I've always looked at it is, like you said, if you bring the goods, you are worth X amount of dollars. Is that how you kind of came to it, or do you feel like you said something earlier where you're like, if I'm playing on better records, I feel like I'm worth more?
Well, that gives you clout. If people
Clout,
have seen
okay.
your name on a Dolly Parton record or this or that, and then you go in and you say, well, I need this much now, and okay, it makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But if you just played on, you know, some low ball demo last week, they're going to expect you to keep playing for that kind of dough.
So do you think, as it's changed over the years, I mean, it's changed a lot, but would you say that there are just more opportunities now, or do you feel like it's kind of similar compared to the 80s?
Oh, definitely more opportunities, because everyone's got a studio now. Some of the work has shrunk, though. Everything's an ebb and flow, like publishing songwriting demos.
Yeah.
That used to be a big chunk of studio players' bread and butter. You'd go into a session, the publisher would have a new writer, and they had budgets to pay all the studio players, and they'd hire a nice big band. They'd hire me, who's a frosting on the cake musician.
Probably one of the greatest utility musicians in the history of music.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
But when the demo budget is small, you're not going to get the guy who can play the chromatic harmonica and the penny whistle and the little nice details. You're going to just get the core band: bass, guitar, keyboards, drums. But for a while there, the music was booming, and publishers would actually have me and a fiddle player and utility people, and we'd make really fun records. And then the demo gets cut by somebody, and then the producer wants that little funny little chromatic harmonica part that you did.
Yeah.
So then you get to play on the master, and everything kind of fed off each other. But then as the CD sales took a downturn, publishers are hit. Everybody's hit.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, publishers don't have demo budgets for their writers. And then the writers go out and buy a laptop and GarageBand, and they have to crank out their own demos at their own expense. So the whole thing of playing on demos has kind of gone bye-bye.
Yeah, one of the I want to talk about the process of making records and the process, how it's changed. But one of the things that I really want to do with this podcast in particular is kind of let people in on kind of some of the secrets about how our life and how the music industry does work. And I know back in the day, when I first came to town, that was kind of when George Strait was thinking about retiring, and right after Friends in Low Places help. Garth was kind of on the back end doing the Target stuff, you know, and there was still the demo stuff, and what would happen, and what you touched on would happen a lot, where the demo would end up becoming the master. So I guess in our world, what happens is, you know, a songwriter writes a song, and then you go into the studio, it gets demoed, and then it gets pitched to publishers for artists. And when I came to town, it was kind of like the budgets were low, so what would happen is you'd go in, you'd listen down to the scratch vocal, and you'd write down a number chart, and then you'd get 2 passes, you know, and the keyboard would do a piano part and an organ part, and then they'd move on to the next one because there wasn't time for it.
Right.
So what I'm curious about, back in the day, the differences between a master and a final session compared to a demo, but when you were doing those demo sessions, how many songs would you do in a day, or how much time would you have to, like, really hash the demo out?
Oh, we'd knock out 5 or 6 songs in a 3-hour session.
Nice. So it was the same kind of as how you would do it. Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. Minimal fussing over stuff. And so the result was a lot of creativity, spontaneity. Everybody was playing with confidence and compared
together,
to how
too.
And together, yeah. All
So
in
you
the
weren't
same
doing
room.
it as an overdub kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing to get that energy.
Yeah, right. And the interplay, and of course the jokes, and you get a lot of characters in the room, and it's fun.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
really fun. And you being a wind player like myself, we're used to going in and doing an overdub, and there's nobody there but maybe the engineer and the producer.
Yeah.
And we got to crank up our level of energy and
Yeah.
enthusiasm. It's a little hard without that feedback.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting having been on sessions with you and seeing how you work and how it is. I definitely feel that now that you verbalize it, that you are trying to create that excitement and that energy. And you're absolutely right. You can walk into Blackbird after the band's been there all day and the artist is sitting there. He's tired. The engineer's been there all day and the producer's ears are bleeding. And you go in there with a section and you're trying to make it sound great and get that energy up, you know. And I've seen you do it. That's beautiful. It's interesting that's the first thing you go to, is that getting the energy, you know. And that probably comes from back in the day where you were able to do those things. Yeah. Sorry, that's fascinating. I want to touch on that more. The thing I wanted to talk about too was when you go in, so you get in to do these master things and do these records. Back in the day in Nashville, were they spending like a week on a song? Were they spending a month on a record? Is that a normal thing?
Oh, sure. I think that's been the case at least since whenever the multi-tracks came in and they could do that. Mm-hmm. Back in the 60s and 70s, when you had eight tracks or 16-track machines and no computers yet, and half of the tracks are eaten up by the drums, you got 8 mics on the drums, you kind of have to get everything at once. And you'd have, the steel player and the fiddle guy would all be there, Charlie McCoy doing his vibes or his harmonica. Yeah, there was a lot more of it's got to happen at once.
Yeah, and you're all thrown to one track probably too.
And especially back in the 60s, like on a Roy Orbison date over at Monument, you'd have half of the Nashville Symphony over there, the strings. Wow. And they're live in the room. And over here is Buddy Harmon and the rhythm section guys. And not a lot of mics. Everything's bleeding through. And Roy's behind the panel, and he's got some separation. But he better nail it. Everybody better nail it.
Yeah.
Or they have to do the whole song again.
Yeah.
The editing thing was real primitive.
There's a cut in the tape at that point.
Sure. Yeah, they were doing that.
Well, let me ask you that then. So, how do you feel comparatively now? What about musicianship? Do you think the musicianship and the quality of musicianship has changed? Because back in the day, you can't make a mistake. Otherwise, you got to start from the top.
I don't know if the quality of musicianship is any less because you can fix things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think maybe the concentration level and the terror level is gone. If you screw up your part, well, no problem. Punch me in after blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And for a creative person like you, do you feel like if you remove the terror part, you can be more creative? Or do you think that terror part leads to more creativity?
I think you would be more creative knowing that if you crash and burn, you can have another go. Mm-hmm. I think back in the old days, everyone kind of played it safe because they didn't want to be the one to ruin the take. So you're going to stay well inside your safety zone back in those days, I would think.
That's interesting. Like not really taking any of the risks.
You're going to bring out the licks in your bag of tricks that you have zero chance of goofing up on. Mm-hmm. You don't want to make a boo-boo. Yeah. And now if you make a boo-boo, hey, no problem. Just punch in. So maybe that allows us to take more chances now.
Yeah. Now, do you feel that when you're in your creative process and you're say working on your record or something like that, do you like the ability to do overdubs and be able to control that, or do you miss the energy of having everybody in the room for your own music?
Oh, I like to be able to fuss over everything and just sculpt it and nail it down. Yeah, I like that. And I don't have a home studio set up to record a band. I would love to have a whole bunch of mics and a room that sounds good. Hire some guys, bring them all over. Okay, here's how the song goes, guys, like old school. But I'm such a control freak, and I play all these instruments, so I would rather do each one at a time myself. So I don't have to, be obnoxious to the drummer. You know, a rhythm section guy doesn't like to be told what to do because it's going to mess with his groove.
Yeah, for sure.
So if I've got a
Especially-
certain
yeah.
drum part, you know, rather than try to bend a rhythm section guy to feel this way, do it this way, you know, I'll just play it myself.
I was going to ask you that. So, because I think, I mean, I'm way behind you as far as this is concerned, but I'm the same way where I will play a guitar part and I'll send it to a guitar player and they'll send it back to me and I'll be like, I should have just kept what I did because that was what I was hearing.
Yes,
You know, and you probably feel the same way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Guitar player A, the real guitar player, probably has more chops than you and
Yeah.
better gear, but you're the one who
You're
knows
hearing
what you want. It's the concept, and only you is really going to get close to that.
So so that was going to be my question. You play all these different instruments, and one of the ones that I definitely want to talk about is pedal steel because that's something I want to do someday in my life. But I'm curious: is the reason that you went after some of these instruments and learned them and spent time on them is because you wanted to be able to control what comes, like what sounds are coming out of your brain to this instrument to what is coming out of the speakers? Or do you just like why would you pick up pedal steel? Like what would be that reasoning?
Well, I took it up in 1972 when I got enamored with country rock.
Right on. Okay.
I never paid much attention to country music other than I would hear it at the barber shop and think, boy, that's really weird. Look at those guys with their Elvis Presley hair and those flashy studded suits. It was just like a whole other world to me coming from rock and roll. But no, I was drawn to the pedal steel because I realized that it had great potential. You know, you could play a chord, and while three notes are ringing, one of them bends to another note nearby, and then another of those three notes bends to another note. Then you got this whole other triad, and it just was so liquid and fluid and dreamy sounding. I was seduced by the sound, the same way I was seduced by the sound of the harmonica in 1965 when I saw the Rolling Stones on TV. I was a rock and roll sax player then, and here come the Rolling Stones, and here's this crazy Brian Jones playing Muddy Waters song. I didn't know who Muddy Waters was. Pretty sheltered, white bread, Schenectady, New York upbringing.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
these guys were playing black blues, which was my first introduction to that genre. So I would just fall under the spell of some instrument, either the way the guy looked doing it or the sound of it on the radio. And I never thought ahead to like, ooh, someday I'll be able to, you know, make a record and play all these instruments myself. I wasn't going for the practical application.
Now, how is the process of that for you as far as do you get enamored with something until you achieve a certain until you get that sound? It's like listening to your favorite record. Eventually that favorite record is going to get tiresome and you're going to go on to another record, but you'll come back to it. Like is there a place that you get to on the instrument where you're like, okay, I feel like this is a part of me now, I can kind of move on to another sound that I'm chasing? Or is it always with you?
It always stays. You know, my fascination with an instrument may wax and wane a little bit, but if I'm going to spend the time like I spent on the pedal steel when I jumped in on it about 12 years ago, I know that I'm going to be pretty serious, and it's a time commitment to control. It's a tough beast, you know.
It's probably the hardest of all the beasts that you control.
Well, you can sound halfway decent right away on it. You know, there's some standard tricks you can do with the pedals, but to really have some control over it and make it sound musical, it takes a long time. So I kind of keep all these sounds as, like when I took up flute, I realized I was going to have to practice a lot, and so I don't like lose interest in the flute when I want to play pedal steel, for instance. You know, I can try to keep it up. But as you know from playing a lot of axes, it's hard to keep it up. You got to sort of discipline yourself. And okay, I need a half hour a day on the flute. That session yesterday, you know, I was sharp as hell. You know, I got time to check in on the flute. Here comes a Barry session tomorrow. Better make sure I can slur, you know, control that octave key or whatever.
Yeah, man, I'm smiling over here because I totally understand. It's almost they call you and say, hey, can you come next week to do some woodwinds? And you're like, well, which ones do you want me to play?
Yeah.
And they're like, all of them? You're like, oh, crap.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Time to go in the shed.
the one to me is flute. It drives me crazy. I love it, but it's the one. I always compare it to a trumpet. You know, it's like you got those muscles in your mouth. If you don't keep those up, that thing goes away. You know.
That's right. It's different than the sax and the clarinet embouchure, for sure.
It's one thing. It's interesting that I was talking with Roy about this. You know, people that don't see what we do, and we take this on because we love it, and I'm not complaining. But people that don't see what we do, don't, you know, they'll see you for 90 minutes on stage, or they'll see you for a 2-hour session, but it's like the time that goes in to make sure that you're ready for that session, you know, the years that you put in, and then the time that you have to be, you know, with your mouth, with your breath, especially on, you know, on a saxophone or something like that. It's an interesting life. And I when you say that, it's so true. It's like, oh man, I'm at the point now too, where I'm sure you are, where you're like, okay, well, I'm working on this song, and I really want to get this acoustic guitar part done. So then it's like you have to practice that thing for a week before you put a microphone in front of you, you know, because you want to make sure you sit there and you can execute it. So
they don't see that. They kind of take it for granted that you're gonna just come in and nail it.
Yeah.
And a producer, when he knows you play flute, he heard some record you played on, saw you live, he's got no way to know that it's hard for you to walk in and sound just like Jean Paul or somebody.
Exactly, yeah.
They have no reason to expect that you can't make a sound that good.
Yeah.
Well, you play flute, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, it should sound like that. Or
yeah, you're right. They're holding you to the highest standard on that instrument comparatively to anybody else. I mean, you walk in and play pedal steel, it's like, you need to sound, you know, like Paul Franklin.
Exactly. Well, that ain't going to happen, let me tell you. But I'm getting better.
Is it just a discipline thing for you? You just look like, okay, I need to, like you said, I have something tomorrow. I need to spend X amount of time today to get ready for that.
Yeah. And I also set realistic goals. I know how good I have to be to get the job done.
Yes. I feel you.
And I don't really need to sound like Ron Paul. I don't need that good a tone. Like Sam Levine has serious orchestral tone.
Yes.
But if I get called for a session like the Josh Rouse thing, they often they want like a jazzy pop sound.
Yep.
And have you heard the term beatnik flute?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's like, give me some beatnik flute or some blaxploitation flute. They want you to sound like the breathy guy on the Shaft soundtrack.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can do that. If they want an orchestral tone, they'll get Sam Levine, or they'll call who's the guy from the symphony?
I'm not sure.
The great guy he's from Quebec. I think he left though.
Oh, okay.
The French guy.
I'm not sure.
Oh man, he's great.
I'm sorry.
So if they want a really orchestral tone, they'll go for one of those guys. So
Well, what you're saying is know your limitations, right? I mean, that's a hard thing for us musicians, because we take everything we can, because we never know if the phone's going to stop ringing.
That's right.
When did you come to peace with that? Where you're like, if a guy called you and said, "Hey, I have this." I mean, I think it just recently happened to me, where I got called for a flute thing, and it was like flute and piccolo, and it was like 3 months from now, and I probably could have picked a piccolo up in 3 months, like worked my butt off and got it sorted out.
Do you own a piccolo?
I don't even own one, but I'm, as you,
yes, of course.
Of course I can.
Yeah.
You would do the same thing.
You would, and you'd find a way to do it.
You would find a way, but you look at what that would take, and you separate yourself, and you say, I'm not the right guy for it. This guy's better. When did you come to peace? Are you at peace with that?
Only recently.
Only recently.
It's not in our genes to say that no word.
It's a bad word.
You say, sure.
Yeah. I mean, why is that in musicians? Like, if it's been there for you that long, why is it in us?
Well, because there's the insecurity thing. We have no security.
Yeah.
We have to say yes, and if we can't do it, the guy will go down the list, and there's player B, C, D, F, G. Mm-hmm. So it's in our survival instinct to take everything we can do. Yeah. Plus, we figure if I raise the bar on myself, if I can make it over that bar somehow, then I'll be ready for the next time I can do that.
That's a good point, yeah.
And the more you challenge yourself, the better you'll get. And nothing like a challenge, like saying yes to a record date and you're not sure you can cut it. Mm-hmm. Someone says, "Oh, You know, I want you to sound like Dave Sanborn. Can you do that? Sure, I can. Well, I can't do that.
I'm
But
sure
I-
you could if you
you
had,
know,
a week or so.
You learn to squawk the high F sharp,
Yeah.
a couple of the little stylistic mannerisms, and you know, I can pass myself off as a smooth jazz sax player, but not the way probably you can. And I can name 10 guys in town who do that way better than me. But still, I'm going to say yes to that job
Yeah, of course.
because you know, that's what we do. We got to wear a lot of hats. You got to be sort of everything to everybody.
Hmm.
If you're a famous musician, you get hired to do exactly what you do. Your sound. Don't have to bother playing like Junior Walker, playing like Hank Crawford or whatever.
Hmm.
You know, but
Are
I'm
you
not-
are you happy living inside of that world? Are
Mostly.
you happy being Jim Hoke, malleable, whatever people need to be?
Pretty much,
Mhm.
pretty much. But now I do say no.
Yeah.
I'll actually say to people, you know, I'm not the guy. Here's who you want to call for that. If you
Yeah.
really want the real deal, call so and so,
Hmm.
and I'll save myself the hassle.
Yeah.
I guess I'm getting a little more choosy.
Well, I think you've earned that. I mean, you have we've talked about the idea, you know, branding as a musician, and branding is something that not a lot of session musicians do, because we try to be malleable, you know. And when is the point where you become Jim Hoke or you become Tyler Summers and they want Jim Hoke for this because you're Jim Hoke? You know, that's a scary thing to step. That's a scary bridge to cross. Of being like, well, I'm gonna say no to this side of the town, and I'm gonna move to this side of the town and live here and be myself. And they call me for me. And if they call somebody, like when do they call? Like they call you for you, but it's like we we're talking with Roy. It's like if they call you, I need a saxophone player. I'll take anybody. You know, when do those calls stop coming? When do they go, I need Jim Hoke? Like, do you feel like that's the place that most people are?
Well, that's the goal, isn't it?
Yes, of course, it's the goal.
Where they
yeah.
want you because they know that you can really deliver. And, you know, I think we're all kind of there to different degrees.
And like you said, we have our camps of producers that want us for us. You know, they want us for what we bring to the table.
Yeah,
you know?
and they get a sense of what we do, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, you know.
Yeah, I think that's the only kind of affirmation that we have is our relationships with producers that know that you can do this, 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 and this, and that's the only security that we really have, because we know that if they need whatever, they're going to call us, you know. But yeah, you're right. If you start saying no to that, then the camp changes and somebody else comes in. I mean, it's an interesting world to live in. But I don't. It's funny to hear you say that, because I mean, it's like you've the things that you've done and the people that you're with and stuff like that. I mean, you should have your pick of the lot. In my
Well, thank
opinion.
you.
So if you were to say, what musically is the happiest? Where are you the happiest musically? In what are you doing? If I were to say, musically, what's the happiest thing you could do? Here's $10 million. What would that be?
Being in the studio with Paul McCartney like
Yeah.
I was in January.
So you were in there with him? Was he there?
He was totally there.
Oh, wow.
Totally hands-on,
Was he?
as close as I am to you, singing us parts
That's amazing.
in that famous voice.
Yeah.
Jim, can you do this? Can you scoop that note at the top? Do-do-do-do-dwee-do-do-dwee-do-do.
Wow.
And stuff like that. He knew what he wanted and knew how to talk the music lingo.
I was just gonna say, how much lingo was there? Was there, was it like play it more like the color blue, or was it kind of like, hey Jim, I want you to play this third minor here? Like, is it like how deep did that go?
Very, very musical.
Yeah.
Can you give me that chord in a parallel fourth or
No
parallel
kidding.
fifths, like a power chord on a guitar or like a cello with one finger across two strings? The guy knows his music,
That's awesome.
and
What an experience.
yeah.
Had you worked with him before?
Nope. We got in there via Charles Rose, the trombone player
nice.
and the quarterback of the Muscle Shoals Horns.
Mhm.
Word went out that Paul wanted horns on some songs, but he didn't want the slick LA attitude and sound.
Yeah.
So someone said, hey, why don't you call these Southern guys? They're a little grittier, they'll
Yeah.
rock out for you differently. And so that's how we got to go out there.
Wow, that's
And,
awesome. Where'd you cut it?
It was A&M Studios.
Okay. Was it just a day session?
We were there one day. We did 3 songs before lunch, 3 songs after lunch.
6 in a day. Wow.
And then he says, "That's it, guys. We got it. I got to go meet Ringo for dinner."
Oh, jeez.
And we go, "Ringo,
Who? Oh, wow. That's amazing. Was he a good? I've heard stories that he's just a really genuine human being too. Like remembers your name, looks you in the eye, shakes your hand.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was first name basis all day after he went down the line and introduced himself to all 5 of us.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was Jim. Have one of the chocolate chip cookies. They're quite good. Okay.
Whatever you say, Paul.
Yeah.
I'll eat 2 if you need me to. Wow, that's awesome.
But I did get to play bass harmonica on one song.
No kidding.
I was mostly on Barry sax.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Moffat was on tenor.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Herman was on trumpet. And they had Tom Malone in from New York.
Great.
Famous.
Of course.
He's a multi guy. Plays brass and winds.
He's a great flute
leads.
player too, right?
Yeah, he's good. Man, he's knocked it out.
Cool.
He mainly played trombone. So it ended up being the 2 trombones, Herman on trumpet, and then tenor and Barry.
And did Charles do the charts?
There were no charts. That was the thing.
Okay.
The word from his office going in was there'll be no charts. They already know. They're just going to sing you the parts. They figured out what they want. We listened to. There's a couple of keyboard ideas plunked out, and we'd transcribe them.
Okay.
Paul had plunked out a keyboard line for the horns to play. We just write them out, and then he'd sing us articulations. Can you make that a little more choppy, like a guitar?
That's amazing.
So.
Do you get starstruck? I mean, do you feel that?
Totally.
Yeah.
I was nervous. I walk in there and I see this little alcove off to the side of the main room with a nice cozy little chair and a music stand and a candle on a stand and a very nice acoustic guitar strung up left-handed.
Uh-huh.
I go, oh, Paul's about.
Paul's here.
Paul's here.
Did you know he was going to be there?
This is real.
You knew he was going to be there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then he walked in and immediately we were at ease.
Yeah.
He was just so... he's got that knack, he's developed it over the years. He just puts you right at ease. Sure, I was starstruck and nervous going in. We all were,
Mm-hmm.
But then we got down to work. It was just another session. Here's what we need. Here's the track. Okay, roll the track. Do this. We, just another session, only with a Beatle.
Only with a Beatle, yeah. Yeah, it was... It's interesting that once you get down to work, that's what you do the best. So it's like that you're at the top of the game for that. So it's like no matter who's in the room, you're obviously it's Paul McCartney, but like Paul McCartney is the best at this, and you're at the best as a session person. So it's like now you guys are, I see that. I see that totally happening.
We knew we could give him what he wanted.
Exactly.
And that was a great feeling. So once it got to that, it was, well, this is what we do. This is great.
So recording with the Beatles is pretty awesome. What about where would you put your own music on that spectrum?
I would like to be in some kind of a little combo where I can do everything I love to do, which is mainly play steel guitar and tenor sax, and play a blend of my own tunes that I write and classic tunes that I've grown up loving. I'd like to have a band that knows a million songs. Nobody has to talk.
Yeah.
We can say, hey, let's play whatever. Let's play Michelle. Let's play this song by the Byrds. Now let's play On the Street Where You Live in a Western swing style. Just anything. Some guys that can just, know a lot of songs. That's one funny thing about Nashville is there's a lot of great players, but not a lot of them are converse with all the tunes that are out there. Most great players are pretty much into songs that feature what they do, and they don't necessarily know how to play songs that they just remember from the radio off the top of their heads, to where they'll automatically know the chords and sit down, oh yeah, and just play the chords. Everyone's pretty specific with their skill set.
Has that changed over the years?
I don't think so. If anything, I think it's getting even worse. I think in the old days, studio players, when they get there and before the red light goes on and they're playing to amuse themselves, they might just play any song, just fall into the latest Rolling Stones song or something by Carole King, just for fun, just to warm up. Nowadays, musicians, they're not that way. They're so focused on their one style and their one strength. It's specialization.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find guys that go outside of that comfort zone. They're just, maybe it's because it's so competitive and there's so many great players.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody seems to be interested in just being in a bigger musical universe. It's straight ahead at what they're known for and what their strength is. Don't waste time getting outside of that zone. So it's a little frustrating to find guys that can just sort of stretch out and speak the language. Musical citizens of a broader world is what I would like to find. And but I love playing country steel. I love playing out at the Nashville Palace on Saturday with Dave Spiker and Wendy Newcomer, just playing classic country for 3 hours in a nice, quiet band. Everybody's really good. The sound is nice. Mm-hmm. A variety of ballads and variety of tempos. I dig playing pedal steel, and I like playing it in non-country settings too. Yeah. So I'm trying to cook up a few things right now to do that.
Awesome. There's been some records. One of the I think we might have talked about. Greg Leese?
Oh yeah.
He does that. He's really great at that. And he that Bon Iver record that won the Grammy. Forget the title of it. Bon Iver, he's a singer-songwriter.
Oh, yeah.
Greg's all over that record. It's freaking gorgeous. Yeah. I remember hearing that, and literally, it was the same feeling that, I used to check credits out all the time, but it's more difficult now to see credits, of course. But I remember,
no records anymore.
There's no records.
No CDs anymore.
Yeah, I had an MP3 version of that Josh Rouse record, and hearing you on that was another example of like, I gotta see who that was, and I found out it was you. It's the same feeling with that Bon Iver record with Greg. I was like, man, who is that player? Because he doesn't play like your typical. You're in Nashville, you hear kind of pedal steel, and you put it in this place, And he played it almost as though he was like a horn player, which is kind of similar. Like I feel like they're similar melodic entities,
Definitely, yeah.
The color, so to speak.
It can be horn-like.
I want to go back to what you said about specialized, because I think I share a similar view. That's why I moved to Nashville, and I think the conversations that you and I have had, I share similar views on a lot of different things, but I'm curious to push further into those. But when I was living in New York City, I was playing saxophone, but I was also writing songs and doing other stuff. And I saw, when you live in New York City as a saxophone player, you have to pick your path. It's like, because there's 20 guys that sound like Charlie Parker, there's 20 guys that sound like John Coltrane, there's 20 guys, and they're all the best at it. You kind of have to pick your specialty about what genre you're going to go after and go after it. So that was one of the things. I was like, man, I would get bored as heck if I had to sound like one person all the time. So I said, I want to write songs. I want to produce. So I want to record. So that's one of the reasons that I was drawn to Nashville, is because one day I could write a song with somebody, one day I could produce something, and the next day I'd be in a session playing saxophone. And I think you and I are similar in that, is that we have a real broad spectrum of what we like and what we listen to and love, depending on the day. And it's interesting for you to say that doesn't exist. Like that in Nashville, it's also the same way as it is in New York. Do you feel like there's a similarity there? Like, is that correlate?
Well, based on what you just said, I think I maybe wasn't fair to Nashville in saying that, because apparently, and I have heard that too about New York, if you're a sax player, you got to be a cannonball guy or this guy. It's definitely not like that in Nashville. Compared to that, Nashville is a lot more relaxed.
Even in like the guitar world, like if you're a guitar player, can you live in different places? Or do you have
totally.
To pick? Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Like there's a lot of electric guitar guys that are known for electric that are also great acoustic players, but they get sort of typecast as the electric guy. Or there's great acoustic players because they're good at that. It's hard for them to get a chance to show what they can do on electric, and they're great. But I guess that's the challenge, is to try to keep the variety up, But I think if you want to do more things, it's easier to do in Nashville. There's a lot of musicians that are
easier,
ready to,
not easy, easier.
Easier, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think I used to say I would get bored doing one thing, but what I've realized now as I'm getting older is it's not that I'm getting bored, it's that I think that they service each other. And I think I've seen you in sessions do the same thing. And this is where it hit me, where when you're writing an arrangement for something, you're sitting there, and I don't know what your process is, but somebody sends you a track and says, I need a 4-piece horn arrangement. So you sit down with Sibelius, or you sit down with Finale, and you put play on your keyboard, and you're writing the parts. And, yourself as a songwriter, and yourself as a producer, and yourself, knowing where to play things and holes and stuff like that. It's the process of, if you were just a saxophone player that blew 15 choruses on giant steps and then sat on the side of the stage waiting to play the head out, you wouldn't have the tendency, or your path would be a little more difficult to service the song, because that's what we're trying to do when you're doing an arrangement. You're servicing the song, you're
Right.
lifting the song, right? So it always would hit me and be like, you would hear a melody coming out of a chorus, and you now have this 4-bar interlude before it leads into the second verse, and you're pulling that and you're twisting that melody to service the song, and then you have that second verse come, and you have that hole, and you wait a couple beats until the vocal finishes, and whatever word that person says leads you. If it's something cheeky, then you can make a musical decision to do something cheeky as an arranger,
Yeah.
And I think being a songwriter, or being a composer, or whatever, like you are, services your ability and has obviously led you to be one of the greatest session players of all time, because you're sitting there and you're able to service the song because you're also a songwriter. Do you feel like they all kind of help each other?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Do you think people miss that sometimes? They miss the boat on that?
Well, there are players who are just totally dedicated soloists.
Yes.
And they're going to leave the arranging to arrangers and the writing to writers. And they just want to be the fire-breathing 15 choruses on giant steps kind of guy. Or the screaming 2-bar solo Dave Sanborn guy. But you're right. Those guys are kind of, it's easy for them to miss the bigger picture of servicing the song and coming up with a part that's more geared to what the song needs, as opposed to what they want to express about their own playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
but do you feel, so there's a danger in that? We talk about, like you said David Sanborn. David Sanborn is a brand. You hire David Sanborn to come in and be David Sanborn. You don't have him come in and do something. Yeah. So do you think that there's a danger in, I mean, when you're servicing the song, this is what I've been struggling with lately. So, and I'd love your opinion on this. So you have a certain style of arranging or composition that you would do. So, I mean, I would hear something that you would do, and it would be, it's like you have a tone. But what you've explained to me is that you can be malleable, and if they want this jazz thing, they want this jazz thing, and they want this sound on flute, then you go down that path. But do you feel like you can still have a brand and a sound inside of servicing the song, or are you just there to be anonymous, have a thing, and let that be what it is?
Well, I don't think you can avoid sounding like yourself at some level.
Okay.
Because what you're going to write, even if it's determined or inspired by that last lyric before the 4 bars interlude, you're going to draw on what's inside you. And some new melody is going to come out, but that melody is going to be informed by the stuff you've loved and listened to all your life. So even if you wanted to sound generic and just kind of faceless, generic horn thing without a personality behind it, you're still going to have your own personality. So
does it obviously you're getting paid to be there, and you're getting paid to do your job. Are there different levels of excitement that you've experienced? Do you want more freedom? Does that excite you more? Or when you're being constricted and said, I want you to sound like this, does it matter to you, like for your excitement level? Like if they say, just do it, do your thing, or would you like the bigger the box, the better kind of thing?
It goes both ways. I love to be given carte blanche. Somebody sends me a song and just says, go wild. We trust you. We like what you've done. we like your aesthetic. Just go wild and indulge.
Mhm.
Well, that's always fun. Hey, all right, and then you'll try some voicings and you get crazy. But on the other hand, my job is easier the more framework they give me. We want come up with a signature lick for the intro. There's 4 bars. We want that to recur after the first chorus. We want it to go at the ending, and when they give you a bunch of constrictions, then you don't have to make so many decisions. And so sometimes I welcome that. Say, okay, I know exactly what to do. It narrows down the options, and it's comforting in a way. So, and then it's a challenge to find something interesting within those constraints.
Yeah.
So I guess it can work both ways.
So you're kind of happy existing in both places.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be arranging something, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you're approaching, like if you're approaching your own record now, is it going to be a full record, like a full length record?
Full record. I've been kicking songs off,
Oh no.
and here's why.
They make double. There's digital now. You can have like 300 songs on a record.
Nobody wants to listen that much. I want to have 9, 10, or 11 songs,
Right
and then
on.
I'm going to hold them back for my next album.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Right
how
on.
this came about was, I get song ideas from dreams.
Okay.
And if I'm lucky enough to wake up and still remember the song I was dreaming,
Mm-hmm.
I run downstairs and write it down on manuscript paper with everything I can remember about it. The groove.
Wow.
So sometimes there's lyrics, sometimes there's a whole arrangement. Sometimes it's a whole verse, sometimes it's just 2 bars. But if it's enough that something really is vivid, and I think it's worth anything, I feel it's a gift, and I've got to honor it and make it into something and roll up my sleeves and go to work and finish the song. Because, I mean, it's like somebody tapping you on the shoulder.
Have you ever read the book The Big Magic?
No, the big
We
magic.
were talking about it on the last podcast. You might really love it. It's basically explaining that inspiration comes to you. It says, "Are you ready for me?" And if you say yes, you accept it. And if you say no, it goes away.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't want to risk doing that. It might never come to
It
you
might
again.
never come, or go to somebody else.
So as a result, you may have experienced this yourself. You're having a dream. Say you're in a nightclub, and Steely Dan is there, and they're playing this great Steely Dan song, one of the best ones with all these poly chords and a nice hook and a very melodic thing, killer groove. And then you wake up and you go, "Wait a minute, that's not a real song. It's
not
something
done.
else."
Uh,
And then if you're really lucky, you can still remember how it went.
huh.
And so I'm able, if I can identify chords, I can hear a song on the radio and pretty much know what the chords are.
Mhm.
So I can do that with the dream. I don't have to hunt and peck. I pretty much can hear it.
So you're going downstairs and you're just writing out these chord changes that you've heard.
I
and
write
or a
out the
groove.
melody,
Mhm.
any words, I write them out, and I write the chord symbols up above.
Wow.
In a groove note, like "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" by
Mhm.
Culture Club.
Mhm.
Same groove, say.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Chick, chick, chick. Whatever the groove is, I'll write a little note like such and such a song. So
Mhm.
if in case I forget, because when I wake up in another hour, it'll be gone.
Mhm.
So over the last 5 or 6 years or so, I've gotten a lot of these fragments, and I've turned them all into complete songs, and they're all different, and they're all something other than what I would tend to write if I sat down with my cognizant brain
Yeah.
and said, I'm going to write a Jim Hoke song, or I want to write, say, a genre exercise. I want to write a little crime jazz instrumental that sounds like Peter Gunn with an ostinato. We give ourselves little assignments sometimes. I want to write me one of those, a song like that. And but when it's your subconscious dream mind in charge, there's none of your ego involved, and you'll get this idea that you would never have come up with.
Yeah.
And so this album that's taken shape doesn't reflect any of the things that I'm known for. There's not a lot of hot sax soloing. There's not a lot of flamboyant arrangements. Some of the songs sound like 1965 British invasion Kinks songs.
No kidding.
There's a couple of those. Big 12-string walls of 12 strings like the Byrds. Some of it's really folky, just a guitar and harmonica and some water glasses. It's just all over the place. I got Dwayne Eddy to come by and I've got the song called The Floating Zone that's just like Brian Ferry meets, I don't know, it's just really dark and spooky and moody. And stuff that I would never just come up with on my own. And I'm really having a blast. Scott Baggett is going to mix it for me. He's mixed 4 songs. I send them to him, and he makes everything just sound great. I recorded drums with 1 mic on the kit.
No kidding.
And he's got all these tricks to get in there and separate the different sounds, all these sneaky little tricks to make it sound just big.
Yeah. It's interesting that people get so wrapped up. I want to talk more about the record, but it's interesting that people get wrapped up in having to have the best microphones and the best pre's and the best whatevers, and it's just like today's day and age, just capture the magic, because that's the hardest thing to capture. Capture the inspiration and capture the magic, and then deal with that later. I mean, obviously, as long as it's not peaking and it's not, then you're good to go. It's just capture the magic, because there's so many people get concerned and overwhelmed with microphones and stuff like that. But that magic is hard to capture. So is there a common thread between the record, do you feel? Or do you feel like there's something that you've been thinking about or going through or dealing with? It's over the last 5 years, it's put this,
The thread is the process.
Okay.
The thread is the dream genesis of the ideas. Because other than that, there's no unified sound through it, except maybe my voice. I'm singing it all.
Oh, great.
And I don't consider myself a singer, but I'm finding a style, and I'm tailoring my vocal performances to the style of each song. And I like to think that there's some undefinable quality of me that's going to be heard through these things, although I don't know what that would be. My Jim Hokeness, I hope, is somehow in there. But I've got some harmonica in there. I've got some pedal steel. There's some sax parts. And my son is all over it playing cello and strings.
Oh, great.
Some of his violin playing friends are in there.
Awesome. Did you do it all at your house? Record most of it at your house?
Yes, I did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So is all of this from a dream state? Would you say the whole record is?
Pretty much. Yeah, at least they're begun.
I was going to say, probably the seed of it is. But
the seed of it, yeah.
So then how are you attacking each? And so you've got this seed, and I say the word attack. Attack is very negative, but how are you approaching, you have this seed, are you approaching every single one the same way? So you have your elements of groove, your elements of chords, and your elements of lyrics and melody. What do you start with? Or does that change?
I start with whatever came in the dream. Whatever the groove is, whatever the instrumentation, whether it's an acoustic-y, light folkish thing with auto harps and zithers, or whether it's a tough-sounding band, whatever came in the dream will dictate how I flesh the song out. A typical example is a song where I had a complete chorus, and it's like a Burt Bacharach-ish chord progression. So I have to go back and retrofit a verse that will logically lead into this chorus. I have to retrofit it to where it to have a body of music that will logically and satisfactorily lead into this chorus. So that's the challenge in the game.
Do you go take a nap and hope that the verse will come to you?
Yeah. Take a lot of naps and it doesn't come.
So you are at a certain level going using the I'm going to sit down and make this part of your brain. So the ego does come back into
it. Totally. Yeah. The gift part, the dream part is usually the crucial part. So, and maybe the most important part of the song. But then, I do have to put on my thinking cap and roll up my sleeve and put myself in the mindset of what kind of person would have written that song.
Mm-hmm.
And I deliberately went after Burt Bacharach for the closer of the album is the song called "If Things Don't Ever Work Out," and I had Bill DeMaine write a set of lyrics that's just beautiful, and it totally dovetails into the "If Things Don't Ever Work Out" sentiment. And so when it came time to crank out these verses and the channel, I had a lot of work to do, but I'm pretty happy with what I came up with the very sort of 60-ish Burt Bacharach chords and melodies.
Major sevens everywhere.
Major sevens, 5 over 1s, 4 over 5s, that harmonic language.
Yeah.
And a very angular melody. And I had my son sing it. That's the one song on the album that I don't sing. My son Austin, who's 26, no, he's 28. Oh my gosh. Anyway, how the time flies.
Yeah.
But he did this beautiful, he's got a nice head voice in between falsetto and full voice, like Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys,
Yeah.
God Only Knows.
Yeah.
Up in that kind of high, gentle zone, and he just did a beautiful performance of it. So
Wow, I can't wait to hear that. I didn't know that he sang. That's awesome.
he sings and writes and produces. He's all over the place like me.
That's great.
I mean, his main thing is playing cellos. He does a lot of stuff for Jordan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's Jordan's string guy.
Yeah.
He's also Dolly Parton's string guy.
I just heard that. I
She
heard
calls him
rumors.
String Boy. String Boy.
What is the phrase? Dolly can call you whatever she wants as long as she's calling you.
There you go. Yeah.
So when is this record coming out?
I am.
You said you got 4
Well,
done?
it's been dragging on. I'm not in a hurry to finish it, because once I finish it, it'll be done. And then, what do I do with it? But then, no, I'm looking at ways to get it out there.
Mhm.
I'll probably be calling you for some advice, because you're more plugged into the modern thing of accessing music and whatnot.
Well, it's
Probably by the late fall or winter, I think. It's
Okay.
all recorded.
Mhm.
It's all recorded. Scott Baggett is mixing it.
Mhm.
Then it's just a matter of, getting it mastered right and figuring out if I want to press vinyl or CDs. I guess CDs aren't even happening
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. Somebody sent me one that I played on the other day, and I haven't even opened it yet, unfortunately,
Oh.
because I don't have anything to play it on.
Really?
I have nothing. Like, my computer doesn't have anything. Like
Cars don't have.
I don't have it in my car either. Yeah. So.
Well, my 2012 Subaru has a CD. Both of my cars have.
Nice.
My
I'm
wife's
gonna have to
car.
come over to your house to listen to it.
Come on.
I have listened to it, in all fairness, on Spotify. But yes,
There you go.
I have not cracked the CD. But let me ask you this: so when you write a song, this is something that I've been talking a lot about with creative friends is, you're capturing a moment and a feeling, and you're obviously capturing a dream. And obviously these dreams mean something in the moment, because there'd be no reason for you to dream them. Do you feel like you need to get that song recorded, to get that finished and put it out in a way where 5 years from now, if you went back to that song, you would be like, I don't feel that way anymore. I can't go attack that. Like, I'm done. I'm kind of done with that emotion. Do you feel like in your creative process, that's a part of it? Like you're not outgrowing songs, but you know how they say songs are like kids, right? Songs are like, this thing that you've been gifted, and you have this thing, and then the kid grows up and then they become a teenager, and it's like, well, you can't talk to the kid anymore like they're a baby. It's past. Yeah. Do you feel like that with some of your creative output?
Sure. I mean, some of my instrumental songs, I've had bands in town that I wrote a lot of instrumental music for, jazzy, and I listened to some of those, and some of those I feel like that needs to stay back where it was. It served a purpose at the time. I was going for a certain sound, and it doesn't really seem to speak to me now.
Yeah.
Other songs I listen to and go, oh yeah, that still resonates. That I like what I said there. That's still valid. That wants to live.
When you say I like what I said there, where is that coming from? Where do you come from with songs? Do you come from an experience that you've had? Do you come from a feeling? I mean,
Are we talking about songs with lyrics that you sing?
Song with lyrics, yeah. I mean, when you write a song, if things don't work out, is that what it was called?
Yeah, if things don't ever
if things
work
don't
out.
ever work out. Obviously, I don't know the lyrics to that, but I can imagine that going down a certain path, which is probably the complete opposite path of where you actually took it, knowing you, which is the beautiful thing.
Well, Bill wrote the lyric.
So it matters something to him, obviously.
Yeah, and it's kind of his lyric is a very abstract sounding one, like, say, Van Dyke Parks wrote with Brian Wilson, kind of not a real obvious meaning, like, what's he talking about? And I asked him to do that. I said, feel free to let it be sort of metaphorical and not really specific.
Okay.
Kind of the opposite of a country song.
Yeah.
And so he put some stuff in it about a relationship that he had with specific references to things that don't mean anything to anyone else, but they sound pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, that's pretty out there, Bill. And he said, not really. I can explain every single reference in there.
Huh.
So something about lobby bears and
yeah, you took it in a direction that I didn't know.
What do you think a lobby bear might be?
I don't know. I mean, I could think of what that could be. A lobby bear.
It was a hotel in Alaska where he came down into the lobby, and there was a big fake bear, like a grizzly bear, set up in the lobby.
Interesting.
Maybe it was an actual stuffed bear. I don't know. It
I've
was
been
the lobby bear.
I've been a bear in a lobby at about 4 a.m. when I'm waiting to go to the airport after a long tour.
Have you ever
But
been a bear in a
meaning
lobby?
but I've never seen a bear in a lobby. But I've acted like a bear in a lobby.
Sometimes you gotta.
Sometimes you gotta. That's immediately where my head went, for sure. Well, that's interesting. So when you listen to a piece of music, what do you hear first? What's the first thing that hits you?
It depends.
So
Wherever there's some interest, like if it's an Americana song and it's harmonically very limited, 2 or 3 chords maybe, I know that I'm not going to be hearing anything fresh in the chord department, so I'll be listening for the texture maybe, or the groove. The texture, the way the guitars weave together and pulsate, maybe that'll be what grabs me. Or the vocal performance, the feeling in a vocal, or something about the timbre of the voice. I'm always looking for harmonic interest. So
what interests you harmonically? Obviously, you brought up Steely Dan earlier. Is that something that you like, or
ambiguousness in the chords?
Like surprise movements, kind of thing?
Surprise movements, a blend of the familiar and the unexpected, a new use of a familiar bunch of chords.
Okay.
Say 3 or 4 chords that are put together different than the usual way, or maybe a surprising rhythmic application, maybe a phrase that is only 2 beats long, or a phrase that has an extra beat, making you suspend in midair and kind of fall forward into, just something creative and unexpected. I'm not crazy about just totally bonkers chords that's kind of randomly stuck together that don't make a lot of sense. It's not like the weirder the better for me. I like things to satisfy, but to unsettle a little bit.
Yeah.
How about you? What kind of chords are you drawn to?
Well, I see where you're coming from. This psychologist was talking about me. Jordan Peterson was talking about music, and he was talking about how music is one of the most beautiful examples we have in society of patterns. And I completely agree with him, and that's why I think pop music is a very good example of patterns, or a Mozart is a perfect example of patterns. And I think what happened over the course of music history is, as we exhaust ideas. I mean, if you write a piece like Mozart now and present it to a symphony, they're going to be like, no, we're past this. Yeah. So now you have to be weirder and weirder is a word. You have to be strange. New. But what happened, I think, specifically if you look at the jazz history, is all of a sudden you get into a place where, you start departuring with Coltrane takes you to kind of a free place, and then Ornette comes, and then we start getting to a place in jazz where patterns go by the wayside, where they're like, well, let's throw left hand turns in everywhere, and then the listener is lost. My thing about music is, and I was curious about the way that you look at it. I still believe in patterns. I believe that you can make left turns inside of. When I say patterns, I think symmetry as well. So I feel like a piece of music should start and end, and you should have a certain feeling by the end of it. And whatever feeling that is up to the person that composed that piece to give that feeling. That feeling could be a feeling of satisfaction. That feeling could be a feeling of sadness. It could be a feeling of not being satisfied. And to me, I think that has a lot to do with symmetry and patterns. So if I were to sit down with chords, and if I were to sit down and look at something, I would see it from start to finish, and then I would start shuffling the things in the middle. And I'm curious with you what your level of left-hand turn, because when you say adding an extra beat to create tension, I also believe that good music or a good solo has to have tension points, and tension and release is the basis to me of music, whether it's in a groove, whether it's in a melody, whatever it is, whether it's in a chord progression. That's the basis of what it's always moving forward or giving you an on the edge of your seat feeling. And it could be in a vocal where the vocal's cracking and it's emotional. It could be anywhere. But I'm curious, your version of tension and release, to me, what you said was an example would be like putting a 5/4 bar in there to make it feel a little longer. So first of all, I guess the first question is, what level in your music do you accept when it comes to left turns? And the second one would be, how do you where do you see tension and release in what you create?
I used to be more into tension and release when I was writing instrumental music.
Okay.
With my nonette, and I was more conscious of setting up things to disorient the listener, and then bring it back unexpectedly with like a cliche to get jarring contrasts of disorientation versus comfort zone listening. But I'd have to say that with the songs I'm writing now, I don't concern myself with tension and release. It's a little more static, if you will. I'm going for a lot of the time, just a more peaceful, singular place, and I want to get from point A to point B, but I'm not planning out the places where there's turns or unexpected things happen. If it happens, it's more likely going to be accidental. Like I don't say, I think right here I'll drop a beat and plunge ahead unexpectedly with the modulation at the same time. I'm not that good at planning things like that. And if I try, it's going to sound a little stilted and fabricated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I try to relinquish control if I'm writing a singing song. I'm way more conservative with these singing songs than I ever was writing.
When you say the word conservative, what does that mean? What are you conservative about?
Simple.
Okay.
I'm not afraid to do the expected and have things line up, balanced squarely. Here's a 4-bar phrase. Here's a 4-bar phrase. Stuff like that. I'm not afraid of taking the listener right down the path, hold their hand. Here's the verse. Guess where it's going? Yeah, that's right. You guessed right. Now here's the chorus, just like you thought it was going to be. Doesn't that sound nice? Isn't that sweet?
So you're looking at it as a pattern, or in some symmetrical in some way.
Yeah. And if an asymmetrical pattern should suggest itself, like a lyric that stops short of a complete phrase, great, I'll go with it. But I'm not going to...
But it has to feel natural.
Yeah, it has to feel natural and occur to me it can't be like too contrived. At least that's where I am now with this batch of songs. I do have some surprise stuff on this album. I've got this really powerful rock song. I can't even think of titles of them because they're not in paper. In Just a Minute, I got a song called In Just a Minute, and it's just really punchy, energetic rock and roll song. And I've got a couple of 3-beat bars. So you're coming out of this rising scale thing, da 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 da, gong, 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 gong.
Cool, nice.
Stuff like that I
That
always
feels
like
natural to me. I
when
mean,
the Kinks would do something. Yeah, and it flows. It feels pretty good. So there is some a lot of harmonic interest all over this stuff too. So it's not like I've written a bunch of bland Raffi songs for children or something.
Well,
Although
nothing wrong with
Raffi's
that.
pretty cool.
I love Raffi.
Yeah,
He's awesome.
Raffi rocks.
But man, there's no left turns in Raffi.
No.
Yeah, he's not known for that. So then, when you were saying, you immediately referenced the Steely thing. So, you were saying each one, whatever the dream brings to you first, that's what you kind of go after first.
Yeah.
That's what you look at first.
I try to stay within that.
Stay within that box that dream puts you in.
Mm-hmm.
How, if you were to talk to a person that's a creative person I consider you to be creative in all aspects of life. Like I see your brain always kind of looking at things from a different place, and in the short times that we've hung out together or in the studio that we've worked together, I see you always taking something in and you looking at the options, and then typically your options are not options that I would see, especially in like an Aqua Velvet rehearsal, or things that you're hearing and the preciseness of what you're hearing. If you were saying the perfect balance, because obviously we have our ego, which you've talked about, your subconscious and your ego, and your subconscious is where this creative energy comes from, free of your ego, so you're not judging your ideas. And they say, what's the state? The state. This has happened to me a lot. The state right before you fall asleep, when you are conscious but your brain has shut off. I've had ideas pop in there all the time because my ego shuts off and my brain is allowed to show me something, and we'd have it in our dreams and stuff like that. How do you think that people in the creative world, especially in Nashville, because Nashville can be such a let's get together at 2 p.m. and write a song, and let's try to chase this song that's going to be on the radio for this and this. Do you feel like what kind of balance is there between the subconscious and the ego, and how they have to work together? Do you think that music has kind of lost that creative aspect? Because if you would talk about back in my favorite era was kind of that I would listen to would be the 70s, where you had I grew up on the Carpenters and Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and all these people that were free to just kind of create, and they didn't have these restrictions. And then you started getting into, then the Billy Joels and the Elton Johns, and now all of a sudden the labels are getting a little bit more controlling. Like I know Billy made a record and it didn't do well, so they said, okay, we'll go in and make another one. It's like because we need something to sell. Yeah. What kind of do you feel like that balance is not there? Do you feel like we're missing out on some of these Billy Joels or Elton Johns or Bob Dylans in the world because we think the ego is too controlling? If that makes sense.
Well, if an artist has a record deal,
yeah,
if he's lucky enough, or she or they are lucky enough to have a deal, their record company obviously wants them to make hits. Mm-hmm. So that's the overriding aesthetic right there. We got to get something on the radio. So maybe when they come into their writing appointment to write their next hit that's going to replace this song on the radio, mm-hmm. hopefully there'll be something of the subconscious state, some kind of spark of an idea that they can bring to it. So it's not just a totally cold, calculated, let's clone that last Florida Georgia Line song and use this many of their lyrics and use this form and stuff.
Well, it's interesting that like an artist like Taylor Swift, who I would say was probably the most successful one out there right now in the radio genre, she allows her subconscious to come through. Like she would take a relationship thing that happened and she would make something of it. And obviously if it would say there's a major ego part of it too, because they're having to create this thing that will sell. But do you feel like people are accepting of just a small part of that creative subconscious now? Like, do you feel like if it was as slick as if a Taylor Swift song came out in the 70s and if it was that slick, it would never have done anything, because there needed to be more passion and more energy behind it, because that was like obviously at that time too, with what was going on in the world, people needed that kind of thing. I mean, having seen and worked in both, like you're now existing in this, and you existed in the 70s when you were working with those kind of artists. Do you see a difference in what you're doing when you go into the studio and work with these people, or you have an artist that's sitting behind a board looking at you and asking you to do X? Like, do you see a difference?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking me. You mean the process of the 70s that would take place in the studio with the Billy Joel record?
Yeah, like the creative process with I know you work with Billy, so the creative process of working with Billy compared to the creative process of working with an artist in today's day and age. Like how much, like, is there a passion difference? Is it more controlling now? Like, what would you say? Would you say?
I think it depends on the artist. I think today there are artists just every bit as passionate and personal as there were in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And in the 70s, some of the artists were as shallow and calculating as some of that goes on today. I mean, there's always passion, and Taylor Swift, I think she's probably as passionate as anybody.
Oh, absolutely. She's great. And
she takes her teen angst or whatever it is, and channels it into these songs, and they're well put together songs from what I've heard. I mean, I can't say I've heard a lot of it, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just using her as an example because it's I guess in the 70s you would have the passion that existed in those songs was it wasn't as simple as teen angst, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
There was more variety in the 70s.
More different types of passion, like
more
a political
passion. You had Neil Young and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and there's different strains of pop music. You could have more individuality then. Wildly divergent characters within the top 40 or the top 20.
Yeah.
You had Seals and Crofts. Some stuff was more adult-like, some stuff was sillier and kid-oriented. And it seemed like there was room for different personalities on the radio. Mm-hmm. And now I think everything's a little more samey, but maybe that's just because it looks that way from this point.
Well, it's interesting that you said, and I think it is happening. It's like, okay, well, let's replace that hit that's out there already with another hit. I see that for sure.
Yeah, I read that in a magazine someplace. Some publisher, his advice to a songwriter was, if you've written a song and you think it deserves to be a hit, and you come to me with your song and will you publish this? The publisher asked the guy, okay, take a look at the top 10. Which of those 10 songs can your song replace?
Wow.
In other words, can it satisfy whatever entertainment needs this song is providing that people fell in love with? Can your song deliver that same kind of wallop, same kind of content, the same kind of feeling? Is it of that quality, et cetera, et cetera? And that was one kind of criteria to judge if you had something, commercially speaking.
And isn't it funny that the ones that are the most successful are the ones that come out of left field, that don't sound like one of those top
Exactly.
hits,
Especially in the old days. I don't want to sound like an old fart, but the weird sounding song that nobody expected to be a hit, when that goes to the top, that proves that people want something fresh and little
you think
outside.
The industry would realize that obviously they're making money hand over fist, so who knows, but it's interesting that they don't allow people to just be unique and chase that. Like, be yourself, be unique, chase it, let's see what happens.
I think there's too much corporate mindset in the business of music now. and the cost of producing a record and promoting a record and making the video, et cetera, et cetera. These guys are bean counters, and
Guaranteed return on the investment.
that's
sure.
right, yeah. And they think they're more likely to get that return if their song sounds just like a song that made money for the other record company.
Mm-hmm.
And
So what's your overall view on the industry right now? I mean, it's nothing. I mean, we could complain or we could just exist in it and do the best we can, and that's probably the best choice because there's no
Yeah.
reason to complain because we all have opportunities. I mean,
you just answered my question.
great. Yeah.
You go, because like it or lump it, it is what it is. And if we
Yeah.
want to be in the music business, we got to face reality of whatever it is, and find a way to be ourselves and to flourish within the definition of whatever the music business has become.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to not know too much about the ins and outs of the music business because I'm afraid that it's going to make me jaded and resentful.
Well, it's only going to put things in that ego part of your brain that you don't want in there because you're going to have preconceived notions about. Because that's what that is.
Yeah.
Your ego is looking at this song and it's like, well, how are people going to perceive that? And you're like, no, stop that. Just make it.
Yeah. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
I want to feel free to. I want to be naive enough to be able to make a song or put a part on a record or whatever I'm doing, without having to be conscious of, where's this gonna go? How is this gonna get across? That's the industry's problem. That's the artists and the producers' business. They worry about that. I don't have to worry about that. I come in and play what I want to play or write what I want to write for an arrangement. Mm-hmm. If they like it, fine. If they don't, I'll, it didn't work out, or I'll do it again. But I want to be true to my musical personality in the hopes that someone else will like it too and apply it to something in the real world of music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to understand the real world of music.
Yeah.
I just want to understand music.
Yeah, and I think that caring too much now, I think being overwhelmed by, you can get overwhelmed and it can paralyze you by paying too much attention. And I think if you just stay in your lane and do the best job you can, I talk about, we talk about Taylor Swift and we talk about Florida Georgia Line and all that. Awesome. Go do your thing. Reach people. It's cool. I'm not complaining about it because I think it's great. I've never thought I could live a life that I'm living inside of this industry doing what I get to do. I'm incredibly lucky. And I know you've had a beautiful life doing what you've, and all we can do is exist in it the best we can and do the best we can and the job that we can.
Oh man,
inside of it.
I'm dang grateful.
Yeah, isn't it a beautiful thing?
Yeah. The music business might not be a beautiful thing, and the way the wheels turn and the machinery of the business, that's always been what it is. Mm-hmm. But within that, there's still a bunch of beautiful music to be made, and great songs get written, they get on the radio. There are a lot of really nice people in this business. A lot of the artists are just really good people. Yeah. Some of them aren't, but enough of them are that I feel nothing but gratitude for having been able to, be a part of it.
And how lucky are we to live in an age where you can have a dream, you can go downstairs, you can write things out of your dream, you can go back to bed, wake up, have coffee, have breakfast, go into your studio, and you can make that dream a reality, hand it off to somebody to mix, and then all of a sudden you have this piece of music that you did by yourself.
Thing, yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like we have the technology to do that, and not only do we have the technology to do that, but we can get it online, we can get it printed, we can share that. You can share that dream that you had at 4 a.m. with the entire world, and all by yourself.
That's never been possible until recently. Yeah. And you've really taken advantage of that. Your multiple instruments. Your Eleanor Rigby thing was fantastic.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
And which is the Parker tune you did? You did.
The Donald
John
Lee.
Hinchy. Donald Lee.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you can have, not only can you have the fun of doing it, mm-hmm. but then you can present it in this multi-video visual thing and get it out there immediately. And
Yeah, it takes a lot of work, but it's fun.
You got to be nuts enough to want to
It's
do
like
it.
this, you know, you do a podcast, you don't get paid, but you get to have great conversations, and hopefully something comes out of it, you know.
Yeah,
And
it's a beautiful thing. And you can grumble all you want about how much more real everything was in the supposedly good old days of music when it was simple and all that, and before computers made everything, you know, canned and freeze dried, whatever kind of negative spin you want to put on that. But the truth is, like you said, all the technology is just awesome.
yeah,
My dream when I was a kid starting out in music was to own a recording studio, and I envisioned
nice.
maybe 4 or 8 tracks
Oh man,
that I could like play different instruments all by myself and put it together. And I picture some great big room with a high ceiling and mics, you know. I want a recording studio. Well, that laptop there is so much more of a recording studio than that building in my imagination could ever be.
yeah,
And here it is. And my kids growing up just taking that for granted.
yeah,
You know, Dad, can I using your studio tonight? I want to get in there and work on my album. Austin's recording this really great stuff.
awesome.
And unlimited tracks, all these plugins, any kind of reverb, every kind of preamp, you know. I mean, that was unheard of when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's an amazing world now, you know. So
Which means that, like we talked about earlier, it doesn't matter, you know, like you have the access to the technology, but capturing the magic is the thing. That's what matters now.
that's still
you
the
know?
challenge, you
Yeah.
know.
And
it
that'll
always
never. It's in
was.
your hands. It's in your throat. You know, it's in your brain, and that nobody can ever take that away from us.
That's right. It
They
starts
always-
there, and it doesn't matter what the medium is. It's, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and in all life too, it's like, you know, eventually the world's going to be taken over by AI robots, but robots will never feel empathy. You know, like that's one thing that we as humans can do, and it's like they'll never take the creativity away.
Oh,
from
they're
us.
working on it.
Yeah,
They're getting the empathy down.
I'm sure. So let me ask this, last kind of question. So I've kind of been asking everybody that's been here this kind of thing, but what? I mean, I don't know if this is even on your brain. It's on my brain. It's like when I look back on what I've done, my goal as a creative being is to capture moments of my life that I can look back on and remember, you know, like an emotion or a feeling or where I was. Like if I look back on an EP that I did when I lived in New York City and I listen to it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember that feeling, you know, like living in New York
Great.
in a fire, whatever.
Oh.
That's my goal as a creative person. What do you want to look back on and with your creations? Like what is your contribution creatively to society look like in its most beautiful form?
That would be to leave behind some music that somebody might want to listen to for a deeper reason than, oh, this is what Jim Hoke was capable of. I don't want to just leave a calling card of, oh, see, he could play sax like that. Look, he could do that. I would like something bigger, like what you're describing, like a photograph or a diary or a journal that somebody left. Something that will resonate at some emotional level, but also to sound good musically. I mean, basically, it is music and notes and rhythms, and that's what it is. So I want to leave behind some records that I won't cringe when I hear it, and that'll mean something that somebody can enjoy listening to. I'm a humble guy. I don't want anyone to get a profound experience. I mean, that would be lovely, but if someone could just hear something that I did and say, wow, you know, that's pretty good. I like that. I mean, there's so much music now. There's never been more music because it's never been easier for guys like us to make music
Yeah, absolutely.
and keep it in a presentable form for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I've even thought ahead that much.
That's why I was curious. I was curious if you've even thought about that.
No, it's neat that you think of that. So you strike me as kind of a sentimental person where previous times of your life matter to you, and you look back on your period of New York and say, man, that was really something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to be there again the same way at that same time. I want this remnant of it, this something that took root, and there it is. That's kind of nice.
It can be nice, but it can also be a situation where, and I have regrets about this, where I'll have a piece of music that I would write. Say I wrote a piece 7 years ago, and I would never finish it, and then I would go back to, and this is, I would go back to it, and I'm like, I'm not there anymore. Like that's not where
Yeah.
You're right. I am a sentimental and emotional person when it comes to the past, and I feel like when I create something that brings that out, it's almost like a check mark. I can be like, I can put it to bed. And if I don't, it's almost one of those things where you're like, oh shoot, I missed that. And it's not so much like the inspiration, the big magic thing that we're talking about, where it comes to you and you take it and accept it, because that's more of a momentary thing. Like you have it could be 10 seconds, or you have an hour to get this, and then it's gone. It's more of a I want to capture this feeling and have that down so that I can look back and go, oh man, I remember that, and I'm through it, And I feel like almost if I don't capture it and get through it, then it kind of haunts me a little bit. So yeah, That's interesting. So yeah, and you're right. I think the other thing is like you said, I want it to sound good.
Well, of course, yeah.
It's like you want to capture it, but you also have an ego of like, okay, well, I'm going to use all the skills that I have now as whatever that is, whether it's, I'm a better guitar player than I was 10 years ago. Like whatever those skills are, you're not going to put something out that's this piece of crap that's creatively satisfying you. It's like you still want to put something out that I think inherently we have egos in our beings that are not our egos we're talking about earlier, about looking at the future and looking at the past, looking at the present and trying to make this the best thing, as far as if it worrying about it sucking. We still want it to be great because we still want to touch people. Like we want to make music too, that if somebody can, like you said, if they can hear a song and it matters in a certain way to them, as long as you've done it, you don't make a song and go, here's the thing. If you're sitting there going, I'm going to make this song, like you said, that's going to change somebody's life, that song is going to suck. You want to make a song, but you want to put yourself in a box of what your skills are, but still say something creatively that means something to you. But if it means something to somebody else, that's magical too, So I'm with you on that. I think not only do I want to capture those, but I want it to be perceived on the other side as, wow, that's a beautiful thing. Like I see that from my perspective, or that lyric does this for me, That's like a lobby bear. It does this for me, and it reminds me of that thing. So I think that have you ever met a musician that is truly doesn't care about how it's perceived on the other side? Do you think all musicians have that inside of them?
Boy, that's a tough question.
I don't think I've ever met somebody like that.
I've met some musicians who try to give off that attitude.
Vibe,
yeah, I don't care, just toss this off.
Yeah.
But
those are the ones that care the most.
Maybe, yeah.
I think we all worry about. It's okay to admit that.
We all want validation. We all want love.
We're musicians. We're insecure.
Yes. Yes.
Peace. Like I think we can admit that. Like we don't pretend that we're this thing that doesn't care.
I think what we do, the reason we do what we do, is we want someone to feel about something that we did the same way that we felt about something that moved us on whatever level. It might just be a twangy guitar note that you heard on Memphis by Lonnie Mack, this instrumental. It just tweaked your ear a certain way that changed your life and made the kid pick up the guitar. And that kid is going to want to grow up and spend his life trying to play something that hopefully somebody else will hear it down the line and feel about that the same way he felt about Memphis by Lonnie Mack.
That is a fascinating perspective.
And if that can happen, that's the payoff.
That's interesting. Because yes, there are records that have changed your life, that are the records that have changed my life, and maybe that's I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, I mean, that person didn't, he didn't play that guitar solo to change your life.
No,
But
not,
it did.
but it did.
That's interesting.
So what record made you want to play sax, or was it a record?
That's embarrassing. Because it was probably Kenny G. My dad's gonna hate me. But no, it was.
It takes a big person to say that it was Kenny G.
And I got a chance to meet him.
Kenny
and tell
G
him
can
that.
play.
Yeah.
He's got chops out the wazoo.
Yeah, I heard the soprano and I was like, that's it. And then obviously the next record that changed my life was Charlie Parker's. Charlie Parker's "Now's the Time" solo was like, that was it. So it was a quick transition, let's say. But I did play G-bop in my bedroom a few times. I had played that in my bedroom a bunch of times before I got Charlie Parker. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, and then it was kind of the rest was history. What about you? What was your record for sax?
It was Dwayne Eddy Records.
Okay.
Moving and Grooving, Rebel Rouser. Yep, songs like that. He was
awesome.
the really first big star, instrumental rock and roll star that had records that got in the top 10 with his low guitar twangy sound. And his records always featured the sax, and it was a very crisp, aggressive, evil sounding tenor sax.
So you started from kind of a rock saxophone perspective.
Well, my first thing was Dixieland clarinet.
Okay, cool.
And my dad had a couple of Dixieland clarinet records, and I just loved the role of the clarinet in those songs,
Yeah.
bubbling along. And so it was clarinet lessons, and I, could get the fingerings pretty good. So I wanted to be a Dixieland clarinet player. And then my older brother turned me on to his Dwayne Eddy records.
Uh-huh.
So all of a sudden, this is a whole different deal. From the happy, bubbling, carefree clarinet to the savage, animal, dangerous tenor sax that wanted to rip your head off.
Yeah.
And so right away, I went from trying to play Dixieland to playing flutter tongue rock and roll clarinet.
And your clarinet teacher was like, "What are you doing?
What are you doing?" Yeah. So I'm playing along with Peter Gunn on the clarinet. Not too swift.
Yeah.
And I finally got a clarinet. So yeah, it was the Dwayne Eddy records, and then my brother also had some jazz like Dave Brubeck and Stan Getz. He had the album that had "Girl from Ipanema,"
Yeah,
that big
of course.
iconic album.
Yeah.
So that's
a completely opposite perspective of tone.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What'd you say? I remember the reason I started playing music was when I first heard Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart. What was what turned you? Like, what was the first thing that you remember?
It was the Carmen Overture.
Wow.
My parents had some light classics, Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf, the usual stuff. Classical music for just plain folks. And they had this record of the Carmen Overture.
And that got the lick, the ba 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 da ba da ba da that Charlie Parker used to always. Is that in there? Ba boo ba da ba da boo da ba da ba da 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 da. Is that in Carmen?
It might be.
Yeah, I know that was the whole bebop thing. Because Dizzy and Charlie would always do that back and forth.
Oh yeah,
I think it's Carmen, but yeah, it's beautiful.
Or was that Scheherazade?
I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
It might be.
Maybe, but that.
How old were you?
Oh, 5 or 6.
Wow.
I'd sit next to the little portable record player on the floor under my mother's ironing board and just put that record on. It would take me away.
Wow.
I mean, really away. And it was long too. I'd go through these little, sections and movements and stuff. And now we're in a cave, and this is where it gets scary, and this is where.
So you're visualizing while you're listening to it at 5 or 6.
Some of it, yeah.
That's beautiful.
It was pretty powerful. So for you, it was which one?
Mozart, Eine kleine Nachtmusik.
Clarinet music?
No, Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart.
Oh,
Yeah.
is that a vocal or instrument?
I think it's part of an opera. I'm not sure. It was one of those like classical collection things.
Yeah.
And my mom used to say I did it when I like really young, and to the point like she would play. I mean, they were music teachers, so they would play me classical music all the time. And then
that's right.
so I would sit in front of the fish tank and like open and close my hands and listen to like Mozart. My mom was like, "There's something going on here." So
that's what
I would do with my hands. I'd have no idea. Yeah,
that's how it made you go like that.
It did. Yeah, that's what they said. I would do that. Then listen to classical music. So, and then I picked up violin when I was really young, and I hated it. And I hated going to lessons.
Twisting your hand around
it's
and
the worst.
screech.
Oh, it's terrible.
Suzuki. Yeah.
So then, and then I started on clarinet too. We share that in common. So that was your first woodwind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You too.
Yeah,
huh?
my dad was a clarinet player, and he would do duets, or he would do lessons late at night, and he would do clarinet duets, and I would fall asleep every night to like clarinet duets. And then when it came time to pick my instrument, I was like, I'm playing saxophone. And then I heard the clarinet demonstrated in the thing, and I was like, nope, that's the one for me.
Went for clarinet.
Yeah.
And not a Dixieland jazz thing, but more of a legit sound.
Yeah, because I love the woodiness of it, and I love the range of it. The range is what you can do so many things with that instrument. You can make it sound so many emotions. You know?
I know. Yeah.
So, and I'm thankful because covering those holes was not fun for my college buddies who had to learn clarinet after saxophone.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a hard thing. That's not an easy thing to do.
How most of them did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I'd sit them. I'd hear them cussing in the practice room next to me and be like, "Squeak, squeak!" You know, that was. Yeah, I was very happy that I had picked. But you didn't know at the time. You gravitate to what you gravitate to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I didn't have a sax teacher till years after I started playing sax. I'm sure I had a whole bunch of terrible habits.
Yeah.
Because the fingering was easier, you know, and.
It's easy to play fast. It's easy to.
Yeah.
Well,
Sharp keys.
I had to. It's interesting that you say that because I don't know if we've talked about this, but when I got I could play fast and I could do all this stuff, but my sound was just thin. Like I had a terrible sound.
Oh.
And I had never had a teacher.
Still does.
Yeah, it's terrible.
No, your sound is great.
When I was 17, I was about to go to school, and I was like, I couldn't get the sound right, you know, but I could rip on it. And I was realizing that I was playing wrong. I was like biting on the reed.
Clarinet embouchure.
The saxophone.
It's a whole different deal.
I had to relearn the saxophone at 17. So I had this teacher named Stan Karp, who I owe many things to. He studied with Joe Henderson, and he taught me the Joe Allard method of the Dave Liebman kind of thing.
Yeah.
The loose, the corners, and I was literally playing low Fs for months.
Good for you. Had to go back to basics, square one.
Right, basics. Yeah. He would tell me stories of when he was studying with Joe Henderson. Is he would do the same low Fs, and every time that he kind of lost and like got bored and like closed his eyes and was like not doing it properly, Joe would punch him in the stomach because he had to learn how to support. You know, when you just you can play saxophone really easily and get a sound, but you don't know what it's really like to support and get that momentum of the air. And every time he would lose support, Joe would punch him in the stomach.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, so I think he said that to make sure I was focusing in my lessons. But yeah, man, I had to relearn. It was interesting to relearn at that age, because then when you started teaching later on, you really knew the intricacies of how the embouchure was supposed to be. So you could see a student and you'd be like, okay, let's talk about this. Let me explain to you, because I had to scientifically understand why I was relearning the saxophone. Because I was like, screw this, I don't want to have to go through this. And you would have to say, well, this is why you have to do this. So I would learn the way where it's supposed to vibrate. I would learn the angles and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, relearning something at 17 is a fascinating process.
Well, you're still young enough to
really absorb it, but you're developed enough to actually scientifically understand it to the point of where you're able to match the feeling with the explanation. And if you can do that at that age, then you never forget it.
And that's a little abstract too. We're talking about little muscles and systems of muscles and the breathing thing. I mean, I'm not sure I even have it right to this day.
We're all still working on it.
I mean, I got Allard's book, the Liebman, that red book, and I went through that, and I realized I had to change some things, But there are different schools of embouchure. I mean, here we're getting nerd.
I know. Well, everybody's body is different,
Yeah, I think there's a legit sax thing, and then there's the jazz sax embouchure thing of of a lot looser. I mean, some guys in towns, player one might have a kind of a tight looking, this is flat against the chin and all that stuff, and other guys just kind of and do it all with air with not much muscle support. So I don't know where I'm at with that.
Yeah, you have a great tone. I mean, the thing I love about your tone is how round and strong it is, which is obviously coming from that rock side of it too, But you can definitely get that. I mean, you have a good balance of that and the soft subtlety of Stan Getz as well. And I think that's what that's what we're all striving for, is to be as versatile as we can.
Yeah, make it an extension of our voice.
As
much as.
Well, let's stop the nerd talk. How about that?
What's that?
We should stop the sax nerd talk.
All right, yeah.
Before you go, let's talk about how they get your new record. So Jim Hoke, is it Jim Hoke Music?
JimHokemusic.com. That's my website.
That's your website.
All the Aqua Velvet stuff and Otto and my jazz
definitely
albums
check out
up
Aqua
there.
Velvet. Is the record up on sale? Aqua Velvet one up there?
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 Aqua Velvet records.
So Jim Hoke, that's JimHoke music.com, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thanks, Jim, for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
That was fun.
Watch this heavy heart of mine turn this water into wine. Light your match and let it glow, so I know my way home. One more game of tic-tac-toe. You be X and I'll be you. Fall in love like dominoes, then I'll come back home. If I can't find you, go get lost in the simple things. Might I remind you, chase your tail and dream those dreams. One more glass to set me free. Forget right past what's in front of me. I'll be fine, they tell me so, 'cause I know my way